Well, hello, new class. Nice to know that the first day I'm away. I apologize for not being here, but I had a meeting this morning. So if you want to come and see me sometime in the afternoon for some extra help, then I'm, as you should know, very available for extra help. So I'm excited to be teaching you guys for the rest of the semester. So let's get to it. So we're continuing with 3.5 solving quadratic equations. And this is the third method. So I hear that you already learned how to factor, to solve, and I learned that you also did completing the square, which is a really kind of tough one. But here's a third one, which is a quadratic roots formula. So you should know that by now, the quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are just whole numbers. So here we go with the actual formula. X equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac. And this is all over, make sure that your fraction line covers everything, all divided by 2a. So this is the formula that we'll be using, and this is what we call the quadratic formula, which I'm pretty sure you saw in grade 10 academic, but not 100% sure. So for example 1, we're just going to go ahead and solve by using the quadratic roots formula. So finding the x roots is what that means. So to find the x roots, we need to use this formula. So let's start with labeling what a, b, and c are. So in this case, a equals 4, because that's the number in front of the x squared. B equals 2, because that's the number in front of the x, and then you have that lone little negative 3 at the end, which is your c. So you always have to write the formula down first, okay? I don't have very much room here, but I'll just rewrite it over here. X equals negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac, and the whole thing divided by 2a, okay? So let's go ahead and sub in all that info. Negative 2 plus or minus square root. B is 2. I'm going to put that in a bracket because I'm subbing it in. Minus 4 times a value, which is 4, and times the c value, which is negative 3. Don't forget to put all those in brackets, and that your square root closes after that c value, so after the negative 3. And then that's all divided by negative 2 times 4. So now there's quite a bit of math to be done here. X equals negative 2 plus or minus. 2 squared is 4. Actually, don't put that sign right away because you're not sure if it's actually negative. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 3 is 48. But because we have 2 negative, it's going to be a positive. Moving on to putting all of this over negative 2 times 4, which is negative 8. So if we continue with this, 4 plus 48, 52. Now I put my square root a little big here, so I'm just going to close it off, divided by negative 8. And at this point, we need to reduce our radical. So the square root of 52 needs to be simplified. So if I come down here, I know that 52 equals 4 times 13. So because 4 has a perfect square root, the square root of 4 is actually 2. So I'm going to put the 2 in the front and then 13. Or what you could do, I'm not sure how many steps you guys like showing, but I could put this inside my square root, okay, and know that the square root of 4, like I just said, is 2. So you put that in the front and you have a square root of 13 left over, with a negative 8 at the bottom. And here you could simplify even more. So what you would do here is you would go ahead and divide the negative 2 and the negative 8. Okay. Same time, you need to divide this 2 as well. Now I just noticed that my 8 was negative. For some reason, I put a negative 2 right up here. I don't know if anybody noticed, but it's not supposed to be negative. So can you please just go ahead and erase all those little negatives? Doesn't really affect it all too much. I'm glad I caught it early. Okay, but it's not supposed to be negative. So at this point, we're going to simplify this. So it's x equals negative 1 plus 1, because 2 divided by 8 is, or we're dividing everything by 2 here. Okay, so once you divide everything by 2, we have a 4 left at the bottom. You can't just divide one side by 2. You have to make sure that all terms divide by 2. Otherwise, you can't do what I just did in this step. So we're left with negative 1 plus or minus square root of 13 divided by 4, which means that x1 is equal to negative 1 plus square root of 13. So you split them up at this point. Okay, once you can't simplify anymore, you split them up. So at this point, I can't do anything else. I can't simplify the radical. I can't simplify any other numbers. So I split them up into x1, and I split it up into x2. So it's negative 1 plus, and then it's negative 1 minus. Okay. So there's my two x's that I absolutely need. And finish off by saying here is that therefore the x roots are x1 equals negative 1 plus 13 over 4, and x2 equals negative 1 minus square root of 13 over 4. Now you might be wondering why I'm not actually calculating these. At this point you could, but we want you guys to simplify this as much as you can and then tell us what it's equal to. So to do that, just grab your calculator. If you have a calculator that shows steps, that's a lot easier. But if you don't, I have to do the square root of 13 first. So the square root of 13 is 3.60555. And then I go minus 1. Okay, and then I divide that by 4. So it's equal to approximately, we'll round this off to 2 decimals, so approximately 0.65. So don't forget to put the dot up here for the approximately. And the next one's a little bit harder to do if you don't have a calculator that shows steps. So this time I have to type in the same thing, the square root of 13, but I have to put a negative in front, because if you notice down here, the square root of 13 is actually negative square root of 13. So I'm going to add a negative. Okay, I don't think that worked. So I'm going to do the square root of 13, add a negative in front. And then I'm going to put minus 1 again and divide that by 4, which gives us not the right answer. So my calculator is doing something pretty funky here. Square root of 13 minus 1 divided by 4. Okay, so what was happening there is I was pressing the equal sign after I did the negative 1, and it was mixing it all up. So x2 in this case equals negative 1.15, if I rounded that properly. Yep. So you have to put an approximate symbol up here as well. So now you have some values that kind of make sense, since we're going to have to go and graph this. So we also want you to put this in coordinate form. So you can go ahead and put that the x roots are, therefore the x roots are, and leave it as the not decimal form, leave it in the simplified form. So negative 1 plus root of 13 divided by 4, comma 0, because remember when it's an x-intercept, the y value is equal to 0. And we have negative 1 minus square root of 13 divided by 4, again, comma 0. So you should have 2 x roots when it's a quadratic equation. So that's for the x roots, just for the x roots. We have to do the work now for the y root. And not sure if you guys remember how to do the y root, which is also called the y-intercept. In this case, when it's the y root, you have to set x equal to 0. Okay, so I'm just going to rewrite my equation real quick, which is 4x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. The x roots are the harder ones in this case. The y root's a little bit easier. So let's set x equal to 0. So now we have 4 bracket 0 squared. Okay, 0 squared is 0. 0 times 4 is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. So we now know that the y root is equal to negative 3. Okay, I shouldn't put 0 there either. I should put that f at x, okay, because that's my function. And at this case, I subbed in my x equals 0, so it should be f at 0. Okay, so you may need a second there to change that. So f at 0 is equal to negative 3, which means that the y root equals negative 3. But we want it in coordinate form, so therefore the coordinate is 0, comma, negative 3, since when you're looking for y-intercept, the x value is equal to 0. If I go back to the question, I found the x roots by using the quadratic formula. I found the y root. Now we need to find the vertex. So in order to find the vertex, we actually need to find the middle of your x roots. So to find the middle of your x roots, it means you need to find the x coordinate of your vertex. So the x coordinate of your vertex can be found by adding them together and then dividing them by 2. So let's just write down what we're doing. Okay, so x coordinate of vertex. I'm assuming at this point you probably ran out of room, and you may want to be doing this on a separate sheet of line paper because there's not very much room on the sheet. So here's the x coordinate of the vertex. So here's a formula. You add up both x roots and you divide them by 2. So we're basically looking for the midpoint of both of those x roots. So let's just go ahead and do that. So your first x1 was -1 plus square root of 13 divided by 4, plus -1 minus square root of 13 over 4. So that's the top part, but now I need to divide all of that by 2. Okay, so let's work with just the numerator at this point. Since we already have a common denominator, that's fantastic. We can go ahead and do -1 plus -1. And then you'll notice here that plus square root of 13 minus square root of 13 cancel each other out. So there's a plus square root of 13 and a minus square root of 13, and those can be canceled out because you're adding the opposite there. So we're going to rewrite -1 plus -1. We're going to divide that by 4, and all that's going to be divided by 2. So we'll do the numerator at this point. -1 plus 1 is -2 over 4. And at this point, I'm going to change this division by 2 to look like this. And I'm actually going to put that it's divided by 2 over 1. Because dividing fractions, you have to remember that you have to flip the second and then multiply. So I'm going to keep the -2 over 4, change that division to a multiplication, and flip the second one. So multiplying fractions, multiply the tops, and then multiply the bottoms. Of course, we're going to want to reduce. So -2 divided by 2 is -1, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So we get an x-coordinate of -1 over 4. That's the x-coordinate. Now you'll notice, if you go back to where we were doing the work, right over here, notice that when you're doing the quadratic formula, you see that -1 over 4 right over here. You see it in both x's. Okay, so that may be something you want to note to make it a little bit easier on yourself. Once we do other examples, you'll see that it becomes kind of a pattern. Okay, so you still need to remember how to add them and divide them by 2 in order to find that x-coordinate of the vertex. So now that we have the x-coordinate of the vertex, we have to find the y-coordinate of the vertex in order to graph it. So let's just write that down. Y-coordinates of the vertex. So we have the x. Now we're just looking for the y. And I'm hoping that you could remember how to find a y value when you already have the x value. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, you just sub it in. You're absolutely right. So we're going to sub it in into the original formula, which is 4x squared plus 2x minus 3. And the x-coordinate that we got is -1 over 4. So instead of writing y, I'm going to get you guys used to writing f at x. Okay, so I'm just going to rewrite it real quick. Okay, so f at x is with an x in there, but now I'm going to do the function at -1 over 4. So I'm subbing in a -1 over 4 everywhere you see an x. So remember your rules of BEDMAS. You have to do -1 over 4 times -1 over 4. So it becomes positive. -1 times -1 is +1. And 4 times 4 is 16. I like to put a 2 over 1 here when I'm multiplying fractions, just not to make any mistakes. So to multiply the tops, 2 times -1 is -2. 1 times 4 at the bottom is 4. At this point, I'm going to multiply this fraction, but again, I'm going to put it over 1 just so that it's a little bit easier.